Well, we are with another week in this festive celebration of the month of October, celebrating Conscious Living Spiritist Group, the workers, the volunteers, the attendees, and the gratitude that we have at this moment, feeling a little bit emotional for the spirit guides of this home, for our mentors that are here every week, ready to embrace us, seeing exactly the needs of our souls and our minds, recognizing our doubts, our fears, recognizing how much we are in need of love and compassion and understanding. Oftentimes in the loneliness of our days, with the obstacles that we encounter, the difficulties, be it in the form of an illness, be it in the form of financial issues, we know that every week we can count on the loving guidance and embrace of the spirit mentors of this home. And so I think I can speak for everybody here to say that we are very grateful for these doors to have been open for the last 6 years. And in continuing this month-long celebration, today we are going to be talking about a pretty amazing figure in the Spiritist movement, best known in Brazil, being introduced to other nations that are spreading the message of the promised consoler of Christ in Spiritism. And here today, as we start, Spiritists around the world know of Dr. Bezerra de Menezes. Here we are going to see as the doctor of the poor. We look at his face and we recognize in his gaze the spirit that is filled with nobility and love. His essence of compassion and fraternity and brotherhood extending to all at the time where he was incarnated in Brazil in the 19th century and even today. So when we talk about him, we need to keep in mind that although he has already passed on to the spirit realm, he made a special request that he should stay around us while all of his children of his soul, as he so caringly calls us, until not one shadow was left on the face of the earth. And so he's going to be here with us today, whether in presence or in feeling and spirit. And so we invite you to remember his loving gaze as we proceed with our study. I put a phrase here right to begin to talk about him, because in a message about unification of the Spiritist movement, and we are going to understand exactly what that means, he basically asked that we should let Allan Kardec's work not only be believed or felt, proclaimed or manifested in our convictions, but also be sufficiently lived, suffered, wept over, and put into practice in our daily lives. He was somebody who was pretty aware of the mission that he was given on the dissemination of Spiritism, but most of all, he was pretty much aware of the task in being an example in trying to disseminate this message of love, about the need to exemplify, to put into practice all of the aspect of the gospel according to Spiritism, all of the teachings brought on by the superior spirits in the Spirit's book, and all of the other messages that would come from the spirit world as well. Like many other missionaries that we will see in our world, a lot of them will be mentioned here, have been mentioned, you guys are probably thinking about it. We will find that his presence made significant and remarkable difference at a much needed time. As we can see here, his reincarnation on the 19th century was given at a much needed, and it was at a point in time, and we are going to find, based on some of the works that we are going to mention here today, that there is an entire planning for our world at that time, and even now, and for the future. And that although everything seems chaotic at time in our society, there is progress, constant progress. And we will find in the 19th century that it was a time of great and significant changes. We have mentioned here over and over but we will see that it was a period where many great changes took place around the world. Not one nation was favored over the other. Everything happened in accordance with divine providence. There were many noble figures that made their way and started populating our globe in different parts of the world, as we already know, to leave their everlasting impression of hope, of love, of intellectual contribution. And this intellectual contribution, we started off by thinking and remembering the teachings of the gospel according to Spiritism, the era of invention where there were many spirits who were reincarnating with the mission of being an intelligent person on the face of the earth. And what exactly did that mean? Because we know that progress happens both morally and intellectually, but we will see here that the gospel according to Spiritism will tell us that these people were distinguished by the way that they lived. Their mission was to utilize their intelligence for the use and the future of all of humanity. Good morning. If applied correctly, in the condition that this intelligent mission was applied correctly. Because we know that there are many people that are intellectually endowed, but they aren't necessarily putting their hearts into practice as well. The Dalai Lama once stated that brilliant minds can cause great suffering. That it's necessary as well to educate the heart. The development of the good heart, the warm heart, and the development of the good brain, these must go together. And so this goes basically in accordance with the teachings of the gospel according to Spiritism, where they say that if these spirits, with this noble mission of being this intelligent person on the earth, were able to carry out their duties, mission, and obligations in accordance with divine purposes, that humanity would progress a lot quicker. Unfortunately, many of those who had the task of enabling humankind to advance by the usage of both heart and mind didn't necessarily go all the way in accordance with their mission. And so it's interesting to see that others stuck out in our history, and we still think of them in a lot of ways with a lot of love in our hearts. We can go back. Who can mention somebody in our history who utilized their intelligence and their hearts as well for the progress of humanity? It doesn't have to be in the 19th century.
Michelangelo.
Who?
Michelangelo.
Michelangelo, okay. Whom else? Abraham Lincoln? Who agrees? Abraham Lincoln? Gandhi, yes. Martin Luther King, yes. And many other, Mother Teresa, Benjamin Franklin. There are countless names that we can throw out here reminding us of these people who had a specific mission. And it's important for us to understand here that there are great missions and there are the smaller one that many people don't believe that it is, but I can tell you right now that everyone in here have a specific mission to progress, to put into practice love and fraternity as well, be it in a home with a mission of maternity, which is really important, paternity, or in society, the work that we do. How are we applying our knowledge and our intelligence in the work in our society, contributing for the progress of humanity? So these were folks who not only used their intelligence, but also their hearts. And so the 19th century unleashed an amazing amount of enlightenment in the world. We are going to find that almost every country made strides toward a very useful and invaluable form that would assist in the progress of humanity here. And another great aspect of the 19th century that came about, we can't leave it out here, especially in talking about Dr. Bezerra de Menezes, was the sacred teachings of Spiritism that was on the verge of being heard by suffering humankind. And so, on his own mission of enlightenment, and here we're going to talk about Allan Kardec, when he was here to bring consolation, the promised consoler as promised by Christ, he wouldn't be coming along alone to the world. He would have companions and collaborators whose own regenerative work would also benefit those that they would encounter. And this kind of progress, it wasn't going to be manifested only in religious nature, which is even more remarkable. It had to do with every aspect in the 19th century, in the era of intellectuality. Science, we know, had great progress. Other kind of progress that happened that would actually prepare the soil for the 20th century to come. We see here the progress of the typographical art. which influenced centers of human effort, allowing for the birth of many magazines and numerous newspapers and what they called mobile libraries. We had the ease of communication via telegraph and railroad, which, by the way, Dr. Bezerra de Menezes was responsible for at the time that he lived in Rio de Janeiro for developing this other system. Literature was filled with noteworthy and immortal works, and he also contributed for that as well. The dry cell battery, I know this seems irrelevant, but we see here the kind of booming of intellectuality and progress that was happening in all areas that would facilitate and form this ground for the 20th century to come. Atomic theory was explored, and one of the great things was about the arts becoming alive. Painting and music expressed a lofty aspect of advanced spirituality. And so we see the heavenly gift of exchange between the spirit world and the physical world, as most of these people that had the mission of becoming the intelligent person of the earth would receive these kind of inspirations in order to be able to offer this progress for humanity. And even more profound, we will see here in the book On the Way to the Light, on the book channeled by Chico Xavier, Emmanuel telling us also that what happened is that ardent appeals were addressed to the Divine Master by the guardian spirits of Earth's nation. So they're basically telling that there were some guardian mentors, spirit leaders who were responsible for our world, for different nations, and they started asking Christ, making an appeal for him. And so numerous assemblies met in the spirit world in spheres closest to the earth. Here they're telling us this story. And one of the most lucid disciples of Christ descended to the plane imbued with his consoling mission. Who is he talking about? No, Chico wasn't close to being born yet. It was in the beginning of the 1800s, in 1804, when Allan Kardec was one of these disciples imbued with this consoling mission of bringing us the codification of the Spiritist doctrine. Now, we're not saying that Allan Kardec was the new Jesus. That's not exactly what we're saying. We are saying that there were appeals made to Christ himself, the governor of our world, that these missionaries would come and assist humanity at a time where it was pretty nearing the transitioning phase of our planet. And so in accordance with the promise of Christ, Spiritism, the consoler for humanity, arrives to enlighten and prepare the hearts of those who would be put to the test through suffering, through progression for their own spirit, for receiving the seeds that would bear fruits in their own future, for their own process of purification. And so the most interesting aspect of this is that it didn't only include France, which is where Allan Kardec was born. It actually had to do with the entire world. Different parts of the world were having changes occurring everywhere, bringing about the notion of changes. In the 1857, when the Spirit's book was finally released, introduced by Allan Kardec in France, the reason this happened is because at that time France was the it place to be, right? Everybody wanted to be from France and be in France. Even up to today, people want to be from France. But at that time, it was the happening place. Everything that happened in France echoed throughout the world. What's the one country that's like that today? Here. The United States of America is a place that has a huge impact in the rest of the world. But it happened here too in the 1800s. The phenomena of the turning tables in Hydesville, New York, that was bringing about this interest and curiosity in people to try to find out, my God, spirituality started booming, giving us a notion that there was a possibility to communicate with the spirit world. The interchange between the invisible and the visible. And so we find that little things here and there started happening. And so it was only natural that Adolfo Bezerra de Menezes Cavalcanti would be born at this time in another country where the soil was getting ready to receive its seeds.
State.
Huh?
State.
Huh? Oh, I don't know. And so to talk about him, we are going to remember that he is still in the spirit world contributing for us. In this kind of missionaries that we talk about, these people that came with this great mission, we are going to find in in all of their presence, whether it be in Allan Kardec or Bezerra de Menezes or other anonymous disciples of Christ that incarnated among us to lead us by example, that they came to try to encourage us, to try to illuminate our path, to try to lead by example most of all, much like Jesus did, of course, in a much lower scale. So I want you guys to pretty much keep this in mind as we go through understanding a little bit about his life and understanding about his contribution. So he was born on August 29th, 1831, as Adolfo Bezerra de Menezes Cavalcante, which is a huge name which he actually dropped and just went by Bezerra de Menezes upon graduating. And he was born in Ceará, Brazil. So with him, we will find that Bezerra de Menezes was one of the spirits, enlightened spirits, that were called upon in this gathering in the spirit world before he incarnated. And he was proposed this mission of having a tireless work in the benefit of others. That he was ready to come to hear the call of being fraternal, of being compassionate, of committing to the cause, making it a principle of service of his entire life. And so we will see that he took out in a very courageous and selfless way. He had an ability of speech that was so eloquent that anytime he opened his mouth to speak, and we are going to see how this is relevant in his life, people were able to hear. And not because he had beautiful words, but because of the energy that came out and the feeling of his heart was so profound for the people at that time. And Bezerra accepted his mission in the spirit realm before he dove into the flesh, reincarnating among us, knowing beforehand, ahead of time, that the promised consoler would be finding itself a way around the world already. It was starting to germinate in other places, especially in France. He understood that he would be one of those people, one of those spirits responsible, one of those missionaries responsible for consoling the tormented hearts. There was going to be such significant changes, and we can see that they're happening here today in the transitioning moment of our planet. So we can find that this hasn't happened just now. It has been happening for many, many years. We're talking about the 1800s now, in the form of a world of trials and expiation to the one of regeneration. That he would be responsible to join the numerous missionaries around the nations to bring the good news. What is the good news? The promised consoler, the Spiritist doctrine is what? It's basically, anybody? Christ comes and says that he didn't come to abolish the old law brought on by Moses, but rather to exemplify. And Spiritism comes to do the exact same, and also to clarify, to be able to explain to us what we weren't able to understand over 2,000 years ago. And so Spiritism comes at a time when humanity had reached a point of maturity where these seeds would be able to germinate in many hearts. And so he understood that he would be joining these other missionaries. That he would also be responsible, while science progressed, bringing so many new knowledge to humanity, to bring also a notion of philosophy and brotherhood and justice for those who were on the face of the earth and those who would come at a later time. He also understood that the end of the world, as many prophets had stated, would not take place. Not in the sense that was previously understood. When we see our planet today going through all of the transitioning changes with earthquakes and tsunamis, they understood, these missionaries understood, that the changes that were going to take place would be the ending of the old man filled with vices, where humanity would go through their own earth-shattering earthquakes inside their own hearts and emotions, awakening them to a new era of enlightenment, of morality. And so he understood that he would be responsible for consoling those hearts once they awakened to the reality. That it was going to be up to them to put all of their efforts and focus on the gospel of love. It didn't matter what kind of religion, so that they could participate in planting in the hearts of the children of the earth, us, spirit still in our infancy, the notion that would later blossom for us to be able to understand the message that was brought on. And that they were already going to come and join the already established helpers that were already incarnated in the face of the earth. And so he was born among us at a much needed time. Bezerra de Menezes, we are going to find, at a very early age, he started showing that he was pretty intelligent. He is a mission of the intelligent person of the earth, and we are going to see how he applied it. At the age of 4, he started studying in the public school of Friars Villa in Ceará, where he was born. Between 6 and 7 years of age, he showed enough progress, already writing and reading, in a manner that was really unreal at that time for children of that time, and knowing almost as much as his teachers did, which today is not uncommon to see. We see even here at our youth group, kids that are in middle school taking high school courses, kids that are in high school taking college courses, and so we see the advancement of intellectuality that he was showing already. He revealed to be extremely intelligent to the point where when he was 11 years of age, he started taking social studies classes. And when he was 13, he knew Latin enough, well, to teach it to his other colleagues and be able to substitute his teacher when he was absent at 13 years of age. One of the things that he actually understood and took into consideration for his own character was realizing in his own father and home a noble and honest and filled with integrity family. And he took that very seriously. He was encouraged by this kind of upbringing, which shows us the necessity to pay attention to how we are bringing our own kids, because they pay attention. And so he respected and he admired his father. His family had come also from a political background, and so they had an idea, the liberal ideas, especially where freedom of slaves at that time was pretty much a heated topic. His family believed in that, and so he did also. So they were, persecuted often for the kind of leading, and so they had to move around a little bit. But Bezerra de Menezes, when he became a little bit older, he decided, with the reduced amount of money that was given to him by his relatives, he decided to move to Rio de Janeiro and pursue his dream career in medicine. And so he goes, and he suffers all of the struggles of a young man filled with hope, with a good heart, integrity and honesty. And he understood that all of the efforts and struggles that he was putting through was in essence for him, for his own well-being. He was Catholic. He was a very religious man, and even though he followed the Catholic tradition, he had deep questions about the soul and God. And so he kind of put that aside. He didn't really allow his mind to question his faith. It was one of those blind faith. You believe because you believe that it is. One day, this is very significant and it's worth mentioning, and I want you guys to remember this story for the end of our study today. Bezerra de Menezes was in Rio de Janeiro, and he had become filled with expenses, about 50,000 reis. At that time was a Brazilian currency, and I can't really translate it to you guys. It was the name of the currency, like dollars, for instance, to pay for college tuition, rent, and other important expenses. So expenses were piling up a lot. It was one of the very few times that he became a little bit despaired, because his landlord was, threatening to evict him. And so Bezerra de Menezes, filled with faith, raised his eyes to God and asked him for his help. And a few days later, somebody knocked on his door. He opened the door, and it was a young man, refined, well-to-do, dressed up like he was going to college. And he said, are you Bezerra de Menezes? And he said, well, yes, I am. And he says, well, I heard that you are able to give some private classes, and I was hoping that you'd help me with my math classes. And Bezerra de Menezes looked at him and he said, well, to be quite honest, I haven't studied it for a while, and it's my least favorite subject. I don't think I can be of much help to you. But the young man insisted, and he said, you are my only hope. If you could be so kind as to assist me with my classes, I'm afraid I'm going to fail. The young man was able to convince Bezerra, because he started thinking about the expenses piling up, and the young man provided him with an amount of money right then and there. And Bezerra said, please, not now. I'll accept it upon finishing the classes. And he said, no, no, no. You must accept it. If you don't accept it, I'm going to spend it. And then I won't have any money to pay back for the classes. Bezerra de Menezes looked around and he accepted. And he asked him for 1 week to be able to prepare for giving him the courses. And so the young man agreed and he left. Bezerra went to the library, prepared to be able to teach the young man, but the young man never returned. So we see right here, right there, that divine providence, that God, that Jesus was looking after him. Because nobody comes to the face of the earth, a world of trials and expiations with the difficulties that we face, and we try to stay on the right path without the assistance of the Spirit guides and the Spirit world. And so he had his very first sign that he wasn't alone in his effort. We are going to find here some historic data for us to understand a little bit more about his life. In 1852, he enrolled as an intern at the Mercy Hospital in Rio de Janeiro. He graduated from the College of Medicine of Rio de Janeiro in 1856, presenting a doctoral thesis about diagnosis of cancer. Now, this project was so eloquent, so well written, that the professor himself questioned him about the accuracy and the honesty of that paper. Had he copied from someone else? And so he says, we are going to do an oral test. Do you accept? And he says, of course I accept. And after an hour of oral tests, he gained the respect of his professor and his colleagues, because in essence it was his. On April 27th, my birthday, not at that time, I wasn't born yet, but anyway, he applied for a position in the Imperial Academy of Medicine, presenting the work, Some Considerations on Cancer and its Treatment Perspective, and he won. In 1858, he applied to a position as substitute in the area of surgery in the College of Medicine, and instead, recommended by his own teacher, at that time a chief surgeon of the army, Bezerra was named his assistant, assuming the position of surgeon lieutenant. This is pretty expressive because we see somebody here now whose life started getting with high rank positions, and he was utilizing his degree and his notion for the work here. In 1861, Bezerra was elected the public representative of the Liberal Party, which a conservative chief at that time contested because he was in the army. And so in order to be able to attend and truly focus on that Liberal Party position that he had just been nominated on, he quit the army to be able to give his full time and support as well. And then we see here in 1867 that he was elected Deputy General Counsel as well. When we see during his political career, as it would happen with any honest politician, what would happen today with any honest politician? Corrupted. Okay, corrupted, right? Defamation of character, horrible accusations. We see that attacks started happening all around for poor Bezerra de Menezes. You know, he was trying to be integral and honest. And his ideas at that time of reforming, of fraternity, of brotherhood, he became insulted with all sorts of lies by the other politicians that didn't necessarily agree with his way of being. And so one of the things that truly made other politicians itch was his vision on abolitionism. Here we brought that in 1850, supposedly in Brazil, it was abolished, the African trafficking of slaves. But they tell us that it was officially ended in 1888 with the signature of the Golden Law, Lei Áurea, I think I translated it the right way, by Princess Isabel. I used to want to be like her when I was little. You know, it's so cool. Anyway, so in the book On the Way to the Light, they talk about, guys, get this book because it's outstanding. They talk about the aspect of slavery, where they say that fulfilling the order of the Divine Master, they're talking about Jesus, his messengers from the invisible realm labored with government to facilitate the victory of freedom. So we see people in high-rank positions in the government being influentiated with these ideas. We see in the 1800s how many countries started having this idea of abolishing slavery. So it was pretty significant. And he was very strong-minded and opinionated about this. How could we treat other people in the manners that they were being treated, like animals, abused? that didn't go in accordance with the law of justice and love that he was accustomed to understanding and knowing. And so people were really upset about that. And he decided to show his true color one time for those who persecuted him and spoke all kind of calumnies against him for the sake of Jesus, the one that he believed in. And so he decided to leave the public life and focus on distributing to those in need, the poor. He was always ready to assist the needy. One of the great aspects and character of this man is that he wasn't able to see somebody suffering and look the other way. Whenever there was any kind of illnesses, he didn't just take his medical practice with him. He took his heart in consoling words and encouraging words. He took his time as a doctor with his profession, but he went further. He was able to assist those who didn't even have any kind of money to pay for prescriptions. Several times people looked for him. His house was always being knocked at. His doctor office, very small, always filled. In a practice today with rich people, he would have become rich and famous, but he tended for the care of the poor. And so the poor knew that they would find the kind of needy help, assistance, right there in his presence. One time he actually gave his graduation ring for this woman after he was able to attend for her sick child, and he gives her the prescription and she says, I can't even buy food for my kids. How am I going to be able to pay for the medicine? And he raises up his moist eyes to the heavens and he doesn't know what to do because the last coin that he had, he gave to another poor. And with his left hand on the table, he looks down and he sees the shiny emerald on his ring. He takes it out, smiling with it, and he gives it to her. And she says, no, I can't take this. And he says, what good would it be if I wasn't able to help with the ring that is actually what gave me my profession? So he understood. He understood his essence as a doctor. That it wasn't somebody to do business with people, but rather help in every possible way. He later returned to the politic world where he was elected a member of the city council until 1880 when he became, and I already told you guys about this, mayor, deputy general in Brazil. Many people in Brazil know of Bezerra de Menezes and the spiritist influential work that he had at that time. Now I'm going to give you guys a little bit of briefing on the history of Brazil and Spiritism, because you guys know that it happened a lot there. It's bigger. The Spiritist movement is a lot bigger in Brazil than it is here. But they do say that the United States is the third place where Spiritist movement is really growing, yes? Am I correct to say that?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah.
Which is the second?
I think it's in Colombia. Colombia is the second. So they call them the Brazilian Allan Kardec. I like to find the American Allan Kardec. We should find him. He wasn't born a Spiritist, right? How could he be? He was born in 1831. Spiritist codification, Spirit's book came out in 1857. Yet he was already born with the knowledge that would bring him to the Spiritist movement without knowing it. It just so happened that in 1875, when the first Spiritist book had been translated into Portuguese, he received it as a gift from his friend, Dr. Joaquim Carlos Travassos, and so he gave him a copy of the book with a special dedication. Now, Bezerra de Menezes, upon receiving this book with his strong Catholic tradition, didn't really necessarily find it that he would read, but he decided, you know, I live very far away in Tijuca. He was working at the city. He lived in Tijuca. Cariocas, you know, people from Rio de Janeiro know that. So it was about an hour away, and he figured, what the heck, I'm going to read it, right? And so this is how he explains his first initial introduction to the Spiritist doctrine. He says, he gave me the book in the city, and I lived in Tijuca about an hour away. I was carrying the book with me, and since I didn't have anything else to read during the trip, I said, well, why not read this? I will certainly not go to hell for reading it. And after all, it's going to be embarrassing to have to declare myself ignorant regarding this philosophy when I have been dedicating myself to the study of all philosophical school. So he was open-minded, non-judgmental. With this thought, I opened the book and I immediately became fascinated by it, as it happened when I first read the Bible. I kept on reading it, but I couldn't find anything that was new for my spirit. And at the same time, he says, it was truly all new to me. Somehow, I felt I had already read or heard everything that was contained in the Spirit's book. I was quite amazed with that wonderful fact, and I said to myself, it seems that I was a Spiritist without knowing it. Or as people usually say, I was born a Spiritist. Here's somebody who opens up the Spirit's book. His soul, having come already prepared for this kind of knowledge that he would receive, sees a familiarity around this. And then in 1886, before an audience of about 2,000 influential, famous people in the town where he lived, he proclaimed his decision to become a Spiritist. The political figure, the doctor, the eminent politician and citizen declared between 2,000 people that he was indeed a Spiritist. Some people applauded, other people, especially like his own brother, attacked him for his own effort in deciding to become a Spiritist, even going as far as stating that he was no longer considered part of the family. Now to him, this hurt him profusely. And he wrote back to his brother, explaining the love that he had for Jesus, of loving a religion that didn't state outside of the church there is no salvation, but rather without charity there is no salvation, which encompasses all of humankind and all of any kind of religious nature in society. So Bezerra was a religious person in the highest sense. With his involvement with the Spiritist doctrine, he would put into service his own contribution in a philosophical and religious aspect under the light of Spiritism, and he started writing a column in the paper at that time called O País. And this paper was run by the Commission of Dissemination of the Spiritist Union in Brazil. He did this for about 7 years. It was under the philosophical studies under the title Spiritism. And so we can see here that Bezerra de Menezes, without wanting to use his influential figure as a politician and a doctor, did what Allan Kardec did. He chose a pen name in the name of Max. And he did this for about 7 years, while he also attended to other books that would contribute also. We talked about how some of the progress of noteworthy books that were left behind, he actually did a lot of that as well. And he actually started writing for one of the paper that is called The Reformer. It still exists today in the Brazilian Spiritist Federation in Brazil. If Allan Kardec's task as a missionary of disseminator of Spiritism was hard, Dr. Bezerra wouldn't be easy either. And now we are going to get into a little bit of the Spiritist movement in Brazil and try to find similarities in our Spiritist movement in the United States.
Easy.
Easy? Okay. We can't talk. Susana's in the Spiritist Federation of Florida. She can't talk about it. So is Marcelo, and so am I, so we're done talking. Well, anyway, we are going to find here that in 1883, those who were in the core of this Brazilian Spiritist movement and those who directed the Spiritist societies and groups in Rio de Janeiro felt the need of a better structured union, and for this very reason, a stronger one. The Spiritist groups back then, the Spiritist societies, they weren't Spiritist centers as we know. They were kind of like cult societies. They worked in an independent way. They only cared about what they were doing. The other groups had different activities, but they didn't really interrelate with one another. There was no sense of fraternity and unity and unification, which we see the difference of unification and unity. And so it was a very confusing time for the Spiritist Brazilian movement. This is what led to people wishing to create a foundation that would be responsible for agglomerating, can you say that word? Bringing together all these groups with this better structured foundation. And so they created the Brazilian Spiritist Federation. We have in the United States of America 2 federations so far. We have the Spiritist Federation of Florida that was founded in 1987, yes?
April 18.
April 18, 1987. And it's accurate today. We have 20 groups affiliated to the Spiritist Federation of Florida, with other groups that are kind of like adherent to it, but not necessarily affiliated. And one of the aspects of the Spiritist Federation of Florida, one of the things that they try to follow is this movement of unification that was brought by the example of Bezerra de Menezes, and also providing activities and directives so that the groups can be better structured themselves. So the Spiritist Federation of Florida, the Brazilian Spiritist Federation's job is in essence to serve the Spiritist movement. Did I say that correctly? That's what it means. We also have the United States Spiritist Council that is under the International Spiritist Council. And so we see that we are also trying to establish this better structured union movement in the United States of America as well. We are going to find, however, that back then the number of Spiritist societies was pretty large, and only really 4 of them maintain that certain proper direction, directives and guidelines of the Spiritist doctrine, the seriousness of studying the Spirit's book and all of the other messages. But pretty soon, as it happens with any group that is filled with different people, filled with their own vices, disagreements and disharmony started to take place. And so, under the provisions and guidance of Dr. Bezerra de Menezes, who had received from the spirit realm directions as well by the medium Frederico Jr., the famous Spiritist Center was founded. Now, Bezerra de Menezes made a huge effort in trying to collaborate also to the other groups, but pretty soon he found himself alone. Not just that, the participation in the Spiritist Center started to diminish because folks at that time, the arguments that was happening was among the so-called mystics. People weren't necessarily interested in studying the Spiritist doctrine in its wholesomeness, triple aspect of religion, philosophy, and science. Some people just wanted to stick to philosophy. Other people were die-hard, wishing to study only the scientific aspect of the Spiritist doctrine. And others were die-hard, fanatical, religious people. They weren't trying to do the entire aspect of the Spiritist doctrine. So a lot of confusion started happening. In 1893, however, Brazil started suffering some kind of political issue called revolt. And I don't remember now the name, and I apologize. But the situation was political. And because of the situation with the army and the military, they started seeing that a lot of societies started closing until things settled down, including the Spiritist Society. It wasn't a Spiritist thing, it was a political thing. And after a year, signs of improvement started happening in the country, and they saw the need again of being able to reestablish that structure that they talked about. And the Spiritists came up again with the name of Bezerra de Menezes. Now, Bezerra de Menezes was a little bit reluctant about doing this, but automatically he was called upon to run the presidency post of the Brazilian Spiritist Federation and be responsible again for the unification of all of the groups and the Spiritist movement in Brazil. Not an easy task. If you guys ever take the time to go to Brazil, in Brasilia, the capital, and go to the site of the Brazilian Spiritist Federation, you guys will see the picture of Bezerra de Menezes, because he was the second president of the Brazilian Spiritist Federation. And when you look into this picture, it's almost as if his essence and his spirit is there. And in essence, it is, because he still is contributing for the Spiritist movement in Brazil with other leaders. But this is pretty much what happened. He was very reluctant to accept the thorny responsibility because he already knew the kind of minds that were responsible for the Spiritist groups and how hard it was going to be for him to be able to lead people into fraternity and assistance and respect for one another. It was really hard at that time. And so he started having a conversation with a friend of him called Bittencourt Sampaio. And he said, "They want me to go back to the Federation. As you all know, that old society is without president and totally disoriented. However, instead of engaging in the systematic study of Spiritism or the Gospel, it lives to discuss meaningless teachings." So he's already feeling hopeless, and the weight of the task that he was going to have to take responsibility for. So Bittencourt Sampaio, his friend, said, "The worker of the vineyard," which is known as the workers of the Christs, said that it's always assisted. The Federation can be wrong regarding the Spiritist teachings, but it is engaged in the work of assistance to those in need. That is reason enough for it to attract the sympathy of the Lord's servants. I agree, Dr. Bezerra said, but the work of assistance to the needy is adopting exclusively homeopathy in the treatment of the sick ones, a therapy that my family and I follow and that I also recommend to friends. Yet, I am not a homeopathic doctor. This is in fact been creating serious difficulties in my career, turning me into a useless doctor, one that doesn't believe in the official medicine, one that tells others to follow the Spirit's advices, which hinder my right to exercise my profession. Here's a key in this conversation between him. Because Bezerra de Menezes understands that he's receiving assistance from the spirit world. And he's not allowed to charge for this. This goes against what we study about the aspects of mediumship, which is a service to be put into practice as charity. Give freely what freely you receive. So he understood this. And so his friend says, "Why don't you become a homeopathic doctor?" And he says, "I have no knowledge of it. I utilize the one of the spirits and not that of the doctors." And at that point, Frederico Jr., who was one of the most outstanding mediums in Brazil, he had all the kind of mediumship faculties that a person could possibly have. It's pretty amazing. He channels the spirit of St. Augustine, Bezerra de Menezes' own spirit guide. And he says, "It is better this way. It's going to be easier for us to help you in the treatment of our siblings." And he says, "How, kind spirit? Are you suggesting that I make my living out of spiritism?" And he says, "Of course not. You will live of your profession, doctor of the poor, giving to your patients the fruit of your human knowledge, applying homeopathy as your friend Bittencourt suggested. We will help you in another way. We will bring you whenever you need and expenses get tight, a new student in need of private math lessons." And so, filled with humility and encouraged by this message, he decides to take on the hard yet significant task of unifying the Brazilian Spiritist movement. Dr. Bezerra de Menezes was a doctor. His profession, as we can clearly see here, as opposed to wishing for fame and wealth and status in society, he was mostly about serving the needy and the poor, many times giving of himself and his own scarce financial means to help those who were more in need than himself, forgetting about his own family many times and trusting his family to Jesus while he labored in his favor. We would find Bezerra de Menezes one time with his son burning up in fever, and somebody knocking at his door. And when he goes open, it's a woman who's frail and poor and in tears. And she says, "Come quickly, doctor, my daughter is going to die." And he looks at her and he says, "Ma'am, my son." And she cuts him off and she says, "You don't understand. She is my only treasure, my only life." Bezerra de Menezes asks us to wait, goes back into the room, announces a heartfelt prayer to Jesus Christ himself and says, "Doctor of all doctors, please look after my own son." And he leaves the wife with the son to go tend for this other child. When he returns, the entire house is quiet. He goes in, his heart beating fast. What could have happened to my own son? He gets there, the child sleeps in peace, and his wife is beside the child asleep as well. And he smiles with gratitude. One of the things that he did, he cried with his patients. When there wasn't a solution, he didn't just turn his back with the cold aspect of a surgeon, because he understood that he was also a surgeon of the soul. His lips weren't just there to give directions on how to take medicine, but in the necessity of also to keep Christ in the lives. This is one of the aspects of the doctor that not only tended for the physical well-being of his patient, but also the spiritual, never humiliating, never looking down upon them. He touched the hearts of all people that he encountered. Bezerra de Menezes one time is coming out of the Brazilian Spiritist Federation after work, a night of work, and he's coming down the steps and he sees a man who is standing there, and he sees that it's a chance for him to practice charity yet again, but he doesn't have anything to give him. Not a coin, nothing. The man sees, "You must be Bezerra and I need to speak with you." He said, "I lost my job, I have nothing. Can you help me? I've heard you help so many people." And Bezerra tells him, looking up at him, that he had nothing to give him, yet he said, "You're going to go home today and you're going to embrace your wife and your children in the way that I am doing right now. And you're going to pray for the Virgin Mary much as I do right now. And I assure you all will work out." Bezerra leaves heartbroken for not having been able to assist the man. A week later, the man returns and he tells Bezerra that he did exactly as he mentioned. He went home, he poured a jar of water, he prayed to the Virgin Mary. He hugged his family members. They all took a little bit of the sip of the water. And he says that they felt as if they had been nourished for everything that they needed in their physical being. That they slept a peaceful sleep throughout the night. And the next day, miraculously, he was offered a job. And he was there in gratitude for Bezerra de Menezes. There are many, many, many beautiful cases that show that Bezerra de Menezes was a missionary of Christ. And yet we open the Gospel according to Spiritism, and I assure you that in each example you will find each lesson of the Gospel according to Spiritism. The biggest one, charity, as explained by Christ, as the Spirit's guides will tell us, benevolence towards everyone, indulgence towards other people's imperfections, and forgiveness for offenses. This is how he carried out his own responsibility for the Spiritist Federation in Brazil. He will tell us that a doctor was not entitled to finish a meal or ask if it was near or far when afflicted hearts came looking for him. It wasn't because they were entertaining guests that they couldn't help, or because they've worked long hours and are tired, or because it's late at night. He says all of these people are businessmen trying to pay for their own expenses and college debts. That wasn't the place of a doctor. He saw in each being the angel of charity, giving him a chance for him to find his wealth in the spirit world. And he was correct. Bezerra was married twice, to be exact. The first one, his love of 5 years, leaving him with 2 young children after becoming ill. And the second one, as all men of missions, great missions, are never to be tended and left alone without love and harmony in his own place, he found solace yet again on his second wife. He suffered attacks from all sides. He lost 4 of his children. They discarnated before him. The Spirit's movement gave him enough difficulties and worries, and his own financial struggles many times took a toll on the family, but he never lost faith or hope. When Bezerra de Menezes died, his own son questioned, how could our father leave us in such miserable state? And then he recognized that they were all inheritors of the greatest gift any parent could leave them, which was a blessed name filled with examples showing the love and compassion that they could pass on to their own children. And that there was no valuable kind of riches in the world that would replace what their father left them with. Indeed, Bezerra de Menezes, when he died, leaving his second wife behind him, leaving a family with a lot of financial difficulties, the community reached out and helped them out. And when he awakens in the spirit world, he realized that the treasures that he took outweighed any gold in the world. The illuminative path that he set for himself and others was shinier and more valuable than any diamond that we can find. And he wakes up in the spirit world with Selina, a high-order spirit beside him, sent to attend to him by the missionaries of the Virgin Mary herself. And he looks and he sees his first wife and other children. And he hears cheering and applaud in his name. And he's a little perplexed about this. And he says, "What is this?" And she says, "Come with him. Come with me." She takes him by the arm to the open window. And he looks out, and a multitude of spirits, looking at him, crying of happiness, cheering and inviting him and welcoming him home. He says, "Who are all of these people?" And she says, "These are the spirits of the mothers whose children you helped and cured, the couples who had their own battles on earth, whose family you also assisted. These are the people that discarnated even if after you try to help them and put everything into it in trying to make sure that they receive the care of love and patience and assistance from a professional. These are the spirits of those that you consoled and try to clarify in the mediumistic meetings on your name and your behalf." He looks at her and he says, "I don't deserve this." One of the characters of Bezerra de Menezes was his humility. And she asks him, she says, "What do you want to do now? Where do you want to go? You have accomplished your mission. Where do you want to live? Which world in the higher spheres do you want to go to?" And he says, "Please, I ask you that you allow me to stay close to those on the earth that are still suffering, my children of my soul. I wish to stay here until not a shadow is left on the face of the earth." Do I have a message time? 3 minutes? I don't. This is a message of Bezerra de Menezes, a spirit who came to us to show us what the true mission of the intelligent person of the earth was, what charity in its action truly means, what giving of ourselves on behalf of someone else means, the providence of the divine, of divinity, that will always be beside us when we are putting ourselves in selfless work towards the need of others. When we are able to forget about ourselves and remember about the ones who are suffering the most beside us. And so I wish to remind you guys yet again that He is still among us, that He is still beside us. In the spirituous events that we hold, He is with us. He recognizes in each and every one of us children of His own soul. And so you can pray for Him in difficult times, in illnesses, in the financial situations, because He was more of a doctor of our physical body. He is going to be eternally and forever in our hearts as the doctor of our own souls. And just a message from the Gospels that we shouldn't accumulate treasures on earth while we're here, that we should indeed accumulate and create treasures in heaven. And this is exactly what Bezerra de Menezes did. Thank you so much for your attention.